Book 3, Chapter 23 of Resurrection. "By the way, where are you staying?" asked the General as he was taking leave of Nekhludoff. "At Duke's." "Well, it's horrid enough there. Come and dine with us at 5 o'clock. You speak English?" "Yes, I do." "That's good. You see, an English traveller has just arrived here. He is studying the question of transportation and examining the prisons of Siberia. Well, he is dining with us tonight, and you come and meet him. We dine at 5, and my wife expects punctuality. Then I shall also give you an answer what to do about that woman, and perhaps it may be possible to leave someone behind with the sick prisoner." Having made his bow to the General, Nekhludoff drove to the post office, feeling himself in an extremely animated and energetic frame of mind. The post office was a low vaulted room. Several officials sat behind a counter serving the people, of whom there was quite a crowd. One official sat with his head bent to one side and kept stamping the envelopes, which he slipped dexterously under the stamp. Nekhludoff had not long to wait. As soon as he had given his name, everything that had come for him by post was at once handed to him. There was a good deal: letters and money and books, and the last number of fatherland notes. Nekhludoff took all these things to a wooden bench, on which a soldier with a book in his hand sat watching for something, took the seat by his side, and began sorting the letters. Among them was one registered letter in a fine envelope, with a distinctly stamped bright red seal. He broke the seal, and seeing a letter from Selenin, and some official paper inside the envelope, he felt the blood rush to his face and his heart stood still. It was the answer to Katusha's petition. What would that answer be? Nekhludoff glanced hurriedly through the letter, written in an illegibly small, hard and cramped hand, and breathed a sigh of relief. The answer was a favourable one. "Dear friend," wrote Selenin, "our last talk has made a profound impression on me. You were right concerning Maslova. I looked carefully through the case, and see that shocking injustice has been done her. It could be remedied only by the Committee of Petitions, before which you laid it. I managed to assist at the examination of the case, and I enclose herewith the copy of the mitigation of the sentence. Your aunt, the Countess Katerina Ivanovna, gave me the address which I am sending this to. The original document has been sent to the place where she was imprisoned before her trial, and will from there be probably sent at once to the principal government office in Siberia. I hasten to communicate this glad news to you, and warmly press your hand. Yours, Selenin." The document ran thus: His Majesty's Office for the Reception of Petitions, addressed to his imperial name. Here followed the date. By order of the Chief of His Majesty's Office for the Reception of Petitions, addressed to his imperial name, the Menshanka Katerina Maslova is hereby informed that His Imperial Majesty, with reference to her most loyal petition, condescending to her request, deigns to order that her sentence to hard labour should be commuted to one of exile to the less distant districts of Siberia. This was joyful and important news. All that Nekhludoff could have hoped for Katusha, and for himself also, had happened. It was true that the new position she was in brought new complications with it. While she was a convict, marriage with her could only be fictitious, and would have had no meaning, except that he would have been in a position to alleviate her condition. And now there was nothing to prevent their living together, and Nekhludoff had not prepared himself for that. And besides, what of her relations to Simonson? What was the meaning of her words yesterday? If she consented to a union with Simonson, would it be well? He could not unravel all these questions, and gave up thinking about it. It will all clear itself up later on, he thought. I must not think about it now, but convey the glad news to her as soon as possible, and set her free. He thought that the copy of the document he had received would suffice, so when he left the post office he told the isvostchik to drive him to the prison. Though he had received no order from the governor to visit the prison that morning, he knew by experience that it was easy to get from the subordinates what the higher officials would not grant, so now he meant to try and get into the prison, to bring Katusha the joyful news, and perhaps to get her set free, and at the same time to inquire about Kryltzoff's state of health, and tell him and Mary Pavlovna what the general had said. The prison inspector was a tall, imposing-looking man, with moustaches and whiskers that twisted towards the corners of his mouth. He received Nekhludoff very gravely, and told him plainly that he could not grant an outsider the permission to interview the prisoners without a special order from his chief. To Nekhludoff's remark that he had been allowed to visit the prisoners even in the cities, he answered, "That may be so, but I do not allow it," and his tone implied, "You city gentlemen may think to surprise and perplex us, but we in eastern Siberia also know what the law is, and may even teach it you." The copy of a document straight from the Emperor's own office did not have any effect on the prison inspector either. He decidedly refused to let Nekhludoff come inside the prison walls. He only smiled contemptuously at Nekhludoff's naive conclusion that the copy he had received would suffice to set Maslova free, and declared that a direct order from his own superiors would be needed before anyone could be set at liberty. The only things he agreed to do were to communicate to Maslova that a mitigation had arrived for her, and to promise that he would not detain her an hour after the order from his chief to liberate her would arrive. He would also give no news of Kryltzoff, saying he could not even tell if there was such a prisoner, and so Nekhludoff, having accomplished next to nothing, got into his trap and drove back to his hotel. The strictness of the inspector was chiefly due to the fact that an epidemic of typhus had broken out in the prison, owing to twice the number of prisoners that it was intended for being crowded in it. The isvostchik who drove Nekhludoff said, "Quite a lot of people are dying in the prison every day, some kind of disease having sprung up among them, so that as many as 20 were buried in one day." End of Book 3, Chapter 23. Book 3, Chapter 24 of Resurrection. In spite of his ineffectual attempt at the prison, Nekhludoff, still in the same vigorous, energetic frame of mind, went to the governor's office to see if the original of the document had arrived from Maslova. It had not arrived, so Nekhludoff went back to the hotel and wrote without delay to Selenin and the advocate about it. When he had finished writing, he looked at his watch and saw it was time to go to the general's dinner party. On the way he again began wondering how Katusha would receive the news of the mitigation of her sentence, where she would be settled, how he should live with her. What about Simonson? What would his relations to her be? He remembered the change that had taken place in her, and this reminded him of her past. I must forget it for the present, he thought, and again hastened to drive her out of his mind. When the time comes I shall see, he said to himself, and began to think of what he ought to say to the general. The dinner at the general's, with a luxury habitual to the lives of the wealthy and those of high rank, to which Nekhludoff had been accustomed, was extremely enjoyable, after he had been so long deprived not only of luxury, but even of the most ordinary comforts. The mistress of the house was a Petersburg grande dame of the old school, a maid of honour at the court of Nicholas I, who spoke French quite naturally and Russian very unnaturally. She held herself very erect, and, moving her hands, she kept her elbows close to her waist. She was kindly and somewhat sadly considerate for her husband, and extremely kind to all her visitors, though with a tinge of difference in her behaviour according to their position. She received Nekhludoff as if he were one of them, and her fine, almost imperceptible flattery made him once again aware of his virtues and gave him a feeling of satisfaction. She made him feel that she knew of that honest, though rather singular step of his, which had brought him to Siberia, and held him to be an exceptional man. This refined flattery and the elegance and luxury of the General's house had the effect of making Nekhludoff succumb to the enjoyment of the handsome surroundings, the delicate dishes, and the ease and pleasure of intercourse with educated people of his own class, so that the surroundings in the midst of which he had lived for the last months seemed a dream from which he had awakened to reality. Besides those of the household, the General's daughter and her husband, and an aide-de-camp, there were an Englishman, a merchant interested in gold mines, and the governor of a distant Siberian town. All these people seemed pleasant to Nekhludoff. The Englishman, a healthy man with a rosy complexion, who spoke very bad French, but whose command of his own language was very good and oratorically impressive, who had seen a great deal, was very interesting to listen to when he spoke about America, India, Japan, and Siberia. The young merchant interested in the gold mines, the son of a peasant, whose evening dress was made in London, who had diamond studs to his shirt, possessed a fine library, contributed freely to philanthropic work, and held liberal European views, seemed pleasant to Nekhludoff as a sample of a quite new and good type of civilized European culture, grafted onto a healthy, uncultivated peasant stem. The governor of the distant Siberian town was that same man who had been so much talked about in Petersburg at the time Nekhludoff was there. He was plump, with thin, curly hair, soft blue eyes, carefully tended white hands, with rings on his fingers, a pleasant smile, and very big in the lower part of his body. The master of the house valued this governor. Because of all the officials, he was the only one who would not be bribed. The mistress of the house, who was very fond of music and a very good pianist herself, valued him because he was a good musician and played duets with her. Nekhludoff was in such good humour that even this man was not unpleasant to him, in spite of what he knew of his vices. The bright, energetic aide-de-camp, with his bluey-grey chin, who was continually offering his services, pleased Nekhludoff by his good nature. But it was the charming young couple, the General's daughter and her husband, who pleased Nekhludoff best. The daughter was a plain-looking, simple-minded young woman, wholly absorbed in her two children. Her husband, whom she had fallen in love with and married after a long struggle with her parents, was a liberal, who had taken honours at the Moscow University, a modest and intellectual young man in government service, who made up statistics and studied chiefly the foreign tribes, which he liked and tried to save from dying out. All of them were not only kind and attentive to Nekhludoff, but evidently pleased to see him as a new and interesting acquaintance. The General, who came into dinner in uniform and with a white cross round his neck, greeted Nekhludoff as a friend, and asked the visitors to the side table to take a glass of vodka and something to whet their appetites. The General asked Nekhludoff what he had been doing since he left that morning, and Nekhludoff told him he had been to the post office and received the news of the mitigation of that person's sentence that he had spoken of in the morning, and again asked for a permission to visit the prison. The General, apparently displeased that business should be mentioned at dinner, frowned and said nothing. "Have a glass of vodka," he said, addressing the Englishman, who had just come up to the table. The Englishman drank a glass, and said he had been to see the cathedral and the factory, but would like to visit the great transportation prison. "Oh, "That will just fit in," said the general to Nekhludoff. "You will be able to go together. Give them a pass," he added, turning to his aide-de-camp. "When would you like to go?" Nekhludoff asked. "I prefer visiting the prisons in the evening," the Englishman answered. "All are indoors, and there is no preparation. You find them all as they are." "Ah, he would like to see it in all its glory. Let him do so. I have written about it, and no attention has been paid to it. Let him find out from foreign publications," the general said, and went up to the dinner table, where the mistress of the house was showing the visitors their places. Nekhludoff sat between his hostess and the Englishman. In front of him sat the general's daughter and the ex-director of the government department in Petersburg. The conversation at dinner was carried on by fits and starts. Now it was India that the Englishman talked about, now the Tonkin expedition that the general strongly disapproved of, now the universal bribery and corruption in Siberia. All these topics did not interest Nekhludoff much. But after dinner, over their coffee, Nekhludoff and the Englishman began a very interesting conversation about Gladstone, and Nekhludoff thought he had said many clever things that were noticed by his interlocutor. And Nekhludoff felt it more and more pleasant to be sipping his coffee, seated in an easy chair among amiable, well-bred people. And when, at the Englishman's request, the hostess went up to the piano with the ex-director of the government department, and they began to play in well-practiced style Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, Nekhludoff fell into a mental state of perfect self-satisfaction to which he had long been a stranger, as though he had only just found out what a good fellow he was. The grand piano was a splendid instrument. The symphony was well performed. At least, so it seemed to Nekhludoff, who knew and liked that symphony. Listening to the beautiful andante, he felt a tickling in his nose. He was so touched by his many virtues. Nekhludoff thanked his hostess for the enjoyment that he had been deprived of for so long, and was about to say good-bye and go, when the daughter of the house came up to him with a determined look and said with a blush, "You asked about my children. Would you like to see them?" "She thinks that everybody wants to see her children," said her mother, smiling at her daughter's winning tactlessness. "The prince is not at all interested." "On the contrary, I am very much interested," said Nekhludoff, touched by the overflowing happy mother-love. "Please let me see them." "She's taking the prince to see the babies," the general shouted, laughing from the card table, where he sat with his son-in-law, the mine owner, and the aide-de-camp. "Go, go, pay your tribute." The young woman, visibly excited by the thought that judgment was about to be passed on her children, went quickly towards the inner apartments, followed by Nekhludoff. In the third, a lofty room, papered with white and lit up by a shaded lamp, stood two small cots, and a nurse with a white cape on her shoulders sat between the cots. She had a kindly, true Siberian face, with its high cheekbones. The nurse rose and bowed. The mother stooped over the first cot, in which a 2-year-old little girl lay peacefully sleeping, with her little mouth open and her long curly hair tumbled over the pillow. "This is Katie," said the mother, straightening the white and blue crochet coverlet, from under which a little white foot pushed itself languidly out. "Is she not pretty? She's only 2 years old, you know." "Lovely." "And this is Vasyuk, as grandpapa calls him. Quite a different type. A Siberian, is he not?" "A splendid boy," said Nekhludoff, as he looked at the little fatty lying asleep on his stomach. "Yes," said the mother, with a smile full of meaning. Nekhludoff recalled to his mind chains, shaved heads, fighting debauchery, the dying Kryltzoff, Katusha and the whole of her past, and he began to feel envious and to wish for what he saw here, which now seemed to him pure and refined happiness. After having repeatedly expressed his admiration of the children, thereby at least partially satisfying their mother, who eagerly drank in this praise, he followed her back to the drawing-room, where the Englishman was waiting for him to go and visit the prison, as they had arranged. Having taken leave of their hosts, the old and the young ones, the Englishman and Nekhludoff went out into the porch of the general's house. The weather had changed. It was snowing, and the snow fell densely in large flakes, and already covered the road, the roof, and the trees in the garden, the steps of the porch, the roof of the trap, and the back of the horse. The Englishman had a trap of his own, and Nekhludoff, having told the coachman to drive to the prison, called his isvostchik, and got in with a heavy sense of having to fulfil an unpleasant duty, and followed the Englishman over the soft snow, through which the wheels turned with difficulty. End of Book 3, Chapter 24.